Hi there, Dr. Glenn here, and thanks so much for joining us today on our Facebook Live. For any of those of you were with us last Wednesday when the Sarasota Magazine hosted us on a big Facebook Live, we got a lot of questions about diet and supplements and things like that. And so, what we've decided to do, there was no way we could answer all of those questions last week. So, what we've decided to do is start doing these Facebook Lives where you can ask me questions. And we're going to start off talking about diet and how you eat to save your brain, because that was the largest group of questions that we got is what should I eat, how should I eat. Supplements, we'll also have some episodes where we're going to talk about supplements, specifically things that you should take and things and why some things are better for some people and for others. But when we talk about diet, the way I term it with people is this: if you look at all of the things that you can sort of bring in to use on your health, not just brain health, but all of your health. When you look at all of the tools that you have, the biggest tool in the toolbox, this is the way I term it, the biggest tool in the toolbox is diet. That has the most profound impact on being healthy and also on being sick. When we started looking into cognitive decline, and when Dr. Bredesen and the research fellows out at UCLA, at the Buck Institute for Aging at UCLA, they have discovered 36 different things that can cause, or the word that we use is things that drive cognitive decline, things that drive thyroid problems. Well, that's the word that you use. And we have found 36 different things that drive cognitive decline. And we have put those into 6 different categories. The first 2 are inflammation. We'll come back to that. Blood sugar regulation. There's also toxins, hormonal problems, vascular problems, and even trauma. But when we look at the 2 biggest of the 6 categories, the biggest categories that have the biggest impact on your health are things that cause inflammation and things that give you trouble regulating your blood sugar. Now, inflammation is one of these words that it can be very kind of difficult to understand. So I want you to think of inflammation like this. Inflammation is what happens in the process of your body fighting against things that harm it. Okay? So if you got bitten by a mosquito and you get a red swelling thing on your arm, well, that's your body fighting against the whatever the mosquito put into your skin. If you cut yourself and you get an infection, that's your body fighting against the infection. Well, one of the things that happens is when you eat high carbohydrate. Now, what is a carbohydrate? A carbohydrate is a fancy word for sugar. And when you eat a lot of sugar, sugar damages your intestine. We don't think about it that way because we've been doing it for so long. We've actually been eating high carbohydrate diets for well over 60 years, going back into the 60s and even the 50s in this chase for trying to fix heart disease, and we've been cutting our fat out of our diet. We're going to talk about fat as well. But we started eating high carbohydrate diets. And everybody thought, well, this is good for you. This is good because it doesn't have fat and stuff in it, and it grows from the ground like, amber waves of grain blowing in the breeze across, the Midwest or whatever. Well, these high carbohydrate diets, what they've done is they've created a lot of inflammation in the body. They've done other things as well. And your body responds to that. And when it responds to that, one of the things that it does is it ramps up your adrenal system and a lot of other things. And we're going to come back to that as well. So anything that can cause inflammation. So we mentioned high carbohydrate sugar diets, gluten. We're going to talk about gluten in just a minute. Pesticides. The things that they spray on our foods, those are inflammatory. Preservatives that they put into our foods, those are also inflammatory. Toxins and other things. Now, I want to come back for just a moment, and I want to talk about gluten, and I want to talk about why gluten is such a big deal. And even though we'd never really appreciated it for years and years, and one of the reasons we didn't appreciate it is gluten has actually changed. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but the wheat that we grow now, the wheat changed in 1968. The fellow that changed the wheat, his name was Norman Borland. He actually won a Nobel Prize for doing this. And what he did is he genetically changed wheat. If you're my age, then you remember pictures of wheat fields growing across the middle of the continent, and a wheat field would run 5 to 6 feet tall and it blew in the breeze, and that's why we sing about it in God Bless America and all of that. Well, if you've ever seen a wheat field lately, they're only about 18 to 24 inches tall. When Borland hybridized, this is not genetic modification, it's something called forced hybridization. And that's where they started cross-breeding wheat. And what happened was the yield per acre went up about 10 times. That's a lot. The yield per acre went up quite a bit. The drought resistance got much, much better, so we didn't lose crops. Also, the stalk of the plant became much, much more robust. And, so when you would have tornadoes and all those things blowing through the country, that you wouldn't lose crops as much. This was great for the yield, so we were getting a lot more food. But when Borland hybridized the wheat, it changed the structure of the protein. Old wheat, or what had been around for many, many, many years, only had about 12 to 14 proteins in it, and now hybridized wheat has about 42 proteins. So it's actually a different food. Now, when you grind it up and turn it into a biscuit or a pancake or a loaf of bread or pasta or something like that, it may taste the same, but it's actually a different food. And so to your body, you're now introducing a food that a lot of people don't have the enzymes and things to digest properly. So when you eat this hybridized wheat, what it can do is damage your intestinal lining. And when it does this, when your intestinal lining becomes damaged, it releases a chemical, and that chemical is called zonulin. Zonulin was discovered in 2001 by a doctor up at the University of Maryland. His name was Alessio Fasano. He is actually a pediatric gastroenterologist from Italy. And he runs the pediatric gastroenterology department at Massachusetts General now and teaches pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. But he is the fellow that discovered this stuff called zonulin. And what zonulin does is it breaks down what are called the tight junctions between the cells. So your cells between your gut and your blood, I describe them, it's like a coffee filter. And so what you have on the gut side of the coffee filter are the coffee grounds and the water and all of that. And what you want on the other side is just the coffee. And if that happens, then you have a good filter. Well, when something comes along that irritates your intestine, like this hybridized gluten, especially if the wheat has been sprayed with pesticides like Roundup or glyphosate, maybe you've heard of that, well, when you eat this, it damages the cells release zonulin, the zonulin breaks down the intestinal lining, and it's like somebody comes along and pokes holes in your coffee filter. Now, if that happened, you wouldn't like it because you would end up with coffee grounds in your coffee. And if you took a big swig of your coffee and you got a mouthful of coffee grounds, you would probably spit it out. Well, spitting it out is kind of like inflammation. It's your reaction to something not being the way it's supposed to be. So this wreaks all kinds of havoc with your immune system because now you're getting stuff into your blood that isn't supposed to be there. And when that happens, your immune system comes along and it creates these things called antibodies. You've heard of antibodies. Well, antibodies come along and they fight for you and they get rid of bad things and they try to get rid of stuff that's hurting you. And so when you get something in your blood that isn't supposed to be there, your immune system ramps up. This is a completely separate topic, maybe a good topic for someday, but this is why we've had an escalation in autoimmune diseases over the last 20 years as well. Now, in a healthy gut, you make an enzyme and it's called DPP4. And DPP4 neutralizes the zonulin. But when you eat things like hybridized wheat or foods that are sprayed with pesticides, you make more zonulin than your body was designed to deal with. So you break down these tight junctions in the gut, things get into the blood that aren't supposed to be there. Now, that's just the beginning of the problem. We're talking about cognitive decline. So if you get zonulin now leaking from your gut into your blood, that zonulin circulates through the body. The zonulin goes up in the blood that goes to your brain, and now it breaks down what's called the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is like this sacred thing that nothing in the blood that you don't want in the brain is supposed to get into your brain. But if you have holes in the filter between your blood and your brain, now you can get things into your brain that aren't supposed to be there. Things like viruses, things like heavy metals. And yes, somebody just made a comment. This is what when you have the leaking or the breaking down of the barrier between the gut and your blood, that's called leaky gut. When it breaks down between the blood and the brain, we're now calling this leaky brain. So when you get things leaking into the brain that aren't supposed to be there, you get an inflammatory situation in your brain. So imagine when you get a cut or something becomes swollen, you twist your ankle and it swells up or something like that. Well, if things get into your brain that aren't supposed to be there, now you get swelling in here. That is not good. And if it goes on over a long period of time, your brain starts to react to that. And it does so by shrinking and other types of things that lead to cognitive decline. So when we go back now to the diet that we've been talking about, what we want to do is we want to have our approach to diet be anything or a concept where we keep inflammation down, okay? So we want to eat things that don't irritate our intestines, like high carbohydrate or high sugar foods. Now, the flip side of the things that drive inflammation is the carbohydrates or the high sugar content foods. The next group or the next category of things that affect the brain, we call that blood sugar regulation category. So it's like the flip side of the same coin in some ways. When your blood sugar goes up and down quite a bit, every time it goes up, your body releases something called cortisol. That's a stress hormone made in your adrenal glands. It releases adrenaline. It releases insulin to try to bring the blood sugar back down. When this happens, it is very damaging to the brain. Excess insulin damages the brain. So the next thing that we want to do diet-wise, we want to keep our inflammation down, but we also want to keep our blood sugar in a very narrow range. Blood sugar goes up and down throughout the day. That's normal. We don't want it to go up and down a lot. We want it to go up and down a little bit through a very narrow range. So how do you know if you're having blood sugar regulation problems? Well, first of all, if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet, which we've been told to eat this way for years, grains, rice, pasta, all these things, and we've been told to stay away from fats and stuff, and it was All of that stuff goes back to some bad research that was done in the 1950s. But how do you know if you're having blood sugar regulation problems? Well, here are some key things that you can sort of take home with you from here. If you're having trouble getting going in the morning, then you're having a problem with blood sugar. If you need that cup of coffee to get going, we have an energy production problem. Now, if you like coffee in the morning because that's the way the world is supposed to smell when you get up in the morning, that's fine. I love my coffee, but I can live without it. I don't need it. The next thing that you would notice would be in the mid to late morning, that 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock time, kind of before lunch. If you're crashing, your blood sugar is dropping off. And when your blood sugar drops off real like that and you start to crash, you're having a problem accessing stored body fat. Now, most of us nowadays have a little bit of excess stored body fat. And if it's a little bit, that's not too bad. But when you're between meals, your body's supposed to go over into your fat closet and bring out some of that fuel and use it. But if you're crashing, then what's happening is you're not what we call fat adapted. Fat adapted means that you efficiently and effectively access stored body fat when you need it because you haven't eaten in a few hours. But if you're crashing in the middle or late part of the morning, you're not accessing stored body fat. If you're crashing in the afternoon, after you've had lunch, a couple hours, your energy starts to fall off, you just ate too many carbohydrates and you're not accessing your stored fat for fuel. When that happens, that's when you need that afternoon coffee, if that's what you do. Or you need an energy drink, a Monster or whatever those things are. Or you're reaching for a power bar or some sort of snack. If you can't get from lunch to dinner without needing something, then your blood sugar is crashing. And when that happens, those hormones that your adrenal glands make, the insulin, the cortisol, those go into your blood and those also damage your brain. Now, here's another criteria or another little way to look at what you're eating. If you are fat adapted and you are accessing stored body fat like you should not feel any change in your energy from before you ate till after you ate. Or you could just as easily skip lunch and not feel any change in your energy. If your energy is going up and down throughout the day, you're not accessing your stored fat like you should. Now, the other thing is, how do you sleep? Most people don't tie blood sugar regulation to the way that they sleep. But if you're waking up around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and you cannot go back to sleep, so let's say you wake up at 2:30. You get up, you go to the bathroom, you haven't been to the bathroom in a few hours, so you get up, you go to the bathroom, you get back in bed. If you fall right back to sleep, that's great. But if you get back in bed and you lay there for a half an hour longer, and you can't go back to sleep, then you just had something called reactive hypo. Hypo means low, hyper means up. So you just had a reactive hypo low glycemic event, or your blood sugar fell so low, your adrenal glands kicked in, they released adrenaline, insulin, and cortisol into the blood. Hormonally, it's like you just went out and ran around the house 5 times, then you get back in bed and try to go back to sleep. You're not going back to sleep. You're not going to go back to sleep for an hour or so. So if you're waking up in the middle of the night and you can't fall right back to sleep after you go to the bathroom, you're having a blood sugar regulation problem. So the first things that we want to look at when we start looking at diet for the brain, yes, we want to talk about all the different things that you can eat that are fun and taste good and all of that. But we need to understand conceptually what we're doing first. And that's what today is about. So what you want to look at is you want to be avoiding inflammatory foods. Those are carbohydrate-rich foods. And you want to be getting your blood sugar in a nice range. Right now, somewhere between 35 and 40% of people in the United States are diabetic. About 65 to 70% of us are overweight, and half of that is those are clinically obese. We have a serious blood sugar carbohydrate rich diet problem. And this is where we need to address first. So what I want you to do with today is I want you to take away this idea. I need to bring my carbohydrates down. I need to be eating good quality fats and protein. Now, what is that? Healthy fats. I mean, just a couple of things, and we'll spend a whole episode just on fats. But some things that you can start bringing into your diet as you bring your carbohydrates down. What are you going to put in their place? Well, let's put a lot of avocado in there, especially this is Florida. It's the summertime. Avocados are great. That's a good quality, healthy fat. As a matter of fact, there's something in avocados that's really, really good for your brain, and it's called DHA. As a matter of fact, DHA is a type of fat, and every single cell in your brain's the membrane is like the capsule of the cell. Every cell membrane in your brain is made out of DHA. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't realize this, but about 65% of your brain is fat, and about half of that is cholesterol. Cholesterol is not the enemy. A lot of people have been running around for the last, 50 years, taking statin drugs and all this stuff, trying to get rid of their cholesterol. Your brain is made out of cholesterol. This is not the way to do it. The way you solve the cholesterol problem that everybody's talking about is by lowering inflammation. That would be a good topic as well. Heart disease is not a fat disease. Heart disease is an inflammatory disease. Getting your inflammation down and your good quality fats up, that will help you with all kinds of health problems. Now, what else can you do besides the avocados? Coconut oil is great, and if you leave the coconut oil in the fridge, it will be sort of like peanut buttery consistency. If you leave it on the kitchen counter, it will turn to a liquid. It's kind of right at room temperatures when it shifts. That stuff just off a spoon can be great. Also, you can put it in your coffee. You can cook with it. Walnuts are a great source of good quality fats for your brain. As a matter of fact, a handful of nuts is a great snack because you're going to get some fat, you're going to get some protein, you get to crunch on some stuff, and you're not increasing your blood sugar. And then there are fish. There's a group of fish, we call them smash fish. Actually, I didn't come up with that name, but smash fish. These are the fish that people don't normally think about. This is not a grouper or a trout or something. These are things called sardines, mackerel, anchovies, and wild salmon. By the way, let me mention something about wild caught salmon. When you see Atlantic salmon, that's actually a farm-raised salmon. You're looking for wild-caught salmon, and the other one are herons. Now, personally, I'm not too big on herring. I have to tell you, my grandmother, she immigrated to the U.S. From Sweden back in, I think, 1917, 1918. And I remember every Christmas Eve at her house, we had pickled herring. Now, that'll turn anybody off a herring, but that's one of the types of fish that are good. These fish that have more fat in them are the ones that you want to be looking at. So, Annie, do we have any questions? Has anybody given us a question? No? Okay. Well, one of the things that I also want to bring up here is when you're trying to find gluten. And first of all, let me tell you what gluten is in several different things. Gluten is primarily in wheat. Now, everybody knows about that. It's also in barley. It's also in rye. And then there's a couple of what I call oddball things, because in the West, we don't eat a lot of triticale and kamut, and there's some other things. But wheat, barley, and rye, that's where you're going to find your gluten. Now, you may notice that sometimes if you go to the store and you want to buy some oats, like you want to have oatmeal. Well, if you want, when you go look at oats, a lot of times it will say gluten-free. Well, oats are gluten-free. God made them gluten-free. What they're telling you in that case is that the oats are being processed in a facility that does not process gluten-containing grains, all right, so that there's no cross-contamination. This is very important if you are celiac or you have a genetic immunity problem with gluten. So you'll find gluten in wheat, barley, and rye. But the other things you want to start looking at is you want to become an expert at reading labels, because you'll start to find there are places where they hide gluten. They're pretty sneaky, and they'll hide gluten in things like natural flavorings. Yeah, what is a natural flavoring? If it was a natural flavoring, they probably wouldn't have to call it natural flavoring. But a lot of times there's wheat in that. Wheat can be used to thicken things. Just like if you were cooking and you were going to use some flour to thicken up the gravy, well, they do the same thing when they package foods like soups, sauces, gravies, things like that. How about pork and beans? You thought it was just pork and beans. There's a lot of other stuff in those pork and beans as well. One of the sneakiest places that I've ever seen gluten show up is in instant coffee. You got to be kidding. I need some coffee to get myself going, and here I am having gluten. Well, what you want to do is start reading labels. And I'll tell you this, when I first started reading labels years ago, I developed a gluten problem and I had to go this way. And that's another story. But I distinctly remember the day that I went to the grocery store and I was looking for shrimp cocktail sauce. You know what I mean, the spicy, ketchupy stuff. And I remember reading labels, and it seemed like forever I was trying to find a shrimp cocktail sauce that didn't have this stuff called high fructose corn syrup in it. That's a good topic. I'll make a note of that. That's a good topic for a talk, high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is bad stuff. But I was reading labels until I finally found a shrimp cocktail sauce that had sugar in it. Now, you don't want to be eating a lot of sugar, but I found one that had sugar in it instead of high fructose corn syrup. And I probably stood there for 15 or 20 minutes. But now I know what brand that is. I know what the label looks like. I go grab it off the shelf if I want some. So I want to encourage you that when you're learning to read labels, you will get to where you know the ones that you want, and it will get quicker and quicker. But it's a challenge in the beginning, but you're up to it. So I want to thank you all for being here. And we'll be back next Tuesday at 12:30. And next Tuesday, I think maybe we'll talk about good quality fats. That would be a great topic for next Tuesday.
And we just had a follow-up question.
Oh, we had a question. Okay.
Is it bad to eat barley, rye, or wheat if you do not have any gluten issues?
Here, actually, that's a great question. And I'm going to give you a different answer than I would have a year ago. Because in the last couple of months, gluten has been shown to be one of the most damaging things that you can eat when it comes to brain function. So even if you don't have a gluten sensitivity, where when you eat it, you either blow up or you get congested or you feel bad, even if you don't have a gluten reaction, that would be called a histamine reaction. Even if you don't have a gluten reaction, it is still damaging your nervous system. I did not like it when I read that, because I'm just like everybody else. I want to eat this stuff. But you know what? You got to remember that when you start to hybridize foods and genetically modify foods, and you start to change their proteins, it's not the same stuff our grandparents grew up eating or our parents grew up eating. The food has changed, and you've got to be proactive and take charge. They're great alternatives for you. But yeah, I'd have to say now, when it comes to gluten, you got to stay away from it, because it damages your brain, because the gluten causes your gut to release zonulin, which breaks down the intestinal lining, which breaks down the blood-brain barrier, which lets foreign things into your brain that aren't supposed to be there, even if you don't feel it. So if you want to save your brain, the first thing that you should do is take gluten out of your diet, and the next, bring your carbohydrates down. All right, I want to thank you for being here. Do we have any other questions to answer?
Well, what are some alternatives to gluten as far as pasta and rice? Because I've heard that cauliflower.
We use cauliflower rice in my house. And I'll tell you, I have a little bit of rice now and then. I will tell you this. Growing up, I thought that when you went out for Chinese food or Oriental food or Thai food or something like that, that little white box that the rice comes in, I thought that was a single serving size. And then the stuff that you got with it, whether it was General Tso's chicken or pepper steak or whatever it happened to be, that was like went on top of it. You maybe a good large spoon of the rice, but don't eat the whole little white box full of it.
And I
All
heard
right?
that if you chill rice, that it makes it a healthier.
That's right. If you will boil the rice and cook it and then chill it, it actually will change the structure of the starch. Okay? And then you mention one other thing? Cauliflower rice.
Cauliflower.
Now we use that. As a matter of fact, today at lunch I had a gluten-free pizza that was made from cauliflower rice. Tasted great, and we use it around our house all the time when we make Indian food and stuff like that. Cauliflower rice. You need to add a little bit more like salt and stuff to it because it can be a little bland. But hey, you get that stuff right, and it's perfect. It's great stuff. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for being here today. I'm Dr. Glenn, and I'll see you next Tuesday, 12:30. Have a great week. Bye.